Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us on today's podcast. So today I have Noah Johnston, and he is the owner of Sentinel PM, based in Ottawa. And today is going to be a part two of our series on I don't know what you'd call the series, but it's the history and the future of condos. So the first one we did was with Richard Perlstein, and that was the history of condos. And basically, the takeaways from that conversation were really that. What we're seeing over time, and we went back through Richard 50 odd years, 40, 50 years through the industry, is we're seeing a lot less in-person interaction. When I spoke to him, the way he described kind of the 70s, 80s era of condos was a lot of knocking on doors, a lot of, telephone calls because there was no internet, there was no email, lots of letter writing by hand. And there was a personal touch to it. And obviously back then, portfolios weren't as big, buildings weren't as complex. Shared facilities were not as common. And over time, we kind of saw that change where portfolios got bigger, both through necessity and just because technology enabled it. And we saw more people kind of sitting at a desk, especially portfolio managers, with their five screens and running email constantly, sending notices through their different platforms. So it's a bit of an impersonal approach compared to the past. And today, what we're going to talk about really is where things are going to go. If you follow those trends and you look at new technology, and even if you look at sort of the economics of condos in general, what is the next little while going to look like, and what's the distant future going to look like? And I'm really happy to have Noah as our guest here because he's got a cool take on this. Being based out of Ottawa, he's doing more portfolio management, but he also has some really big buildings, which is it's a good person to talk to just based on the diversity of his portfolio. So Noah, welcome on the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Happy to be here and happy to provide some insights.
So I guess let's get it started. I normally run these things just as a conversation, not so much as a Q&A, but I'm curious, looking sort of at the trend that we're seeing in terms of managers kind of leading the industry here, what do you see in the next 2, 5, even 10 years? How do you see the change happening?
Yeah, I think some of the things you've already outlined, I think the trends of less face-to-face interaction is going to be here to stay. I don't see those things as changing. I think it'll become highly dependent on communication, on emails, less so about that in-person interaction. I think we're going to see the roles like become faster than it already is. I think we're already in a fast-paced environment, but I think in this age, things are going to be even more fast-paced. I think there's going to be a necessity that, we see it a lot already in Ottawa, but I think in Toronto, you'll see shifts of there's no longer the luxury or the ability to have that single manager managing a building. I think things will trickle in and portfolio managers are going to be a necessity. So I think all those things are going to be at play. I think the ultimate outcome is going to be that the service delivery and then the things that are going to change are going to be very much different than they were in the past. And I think that's, communications will be different. I think there's going to be fewer of the call me anytime interactions. I think there's going to be more of the triage of things. And I think, we're going to see a lot of change, and lots of the things that we're seeing right now are going to continue to evolve.
Probably evolve, and not just evolve, but accelerate. Like typically change that's driven by technology kind of speeds up as time goes on, not the other way around. So now we're sort of at I wouldn't say the beginning, but still the early ages of AI, which is the big buzzword now, and everyone's talking about it. But we can already see it is having an impact on management. You can tell right away something that can make your writing perfect, analyze documents. That's a game changer. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on sort of the technological piece of this. Obviously, the concept of what a manager does in their role is going to change, and it's hard to tell what that's going to be. You can look at other jurisdictions like BC or even Florida, and they've got kind of different models on how they run, their industries out there. But curious on the the technological side, what do you think the job's actually going to look like?
Yeah. I think, from at the onset, there's going to be, I think, a change in expectations from clients and from board members. I think right now there's this understanding that time being spent on site is value. And I think those expectations, because of technology, are going to change. I think it's going to be more about outcomes. It's going to be more about responsiveness. Those are going to be the things that really are providing the value. I think technology has already, touched the condominium industry in a big way, and I think it'll continue to do that. I see the future being having technology be such a critical infrastructure to a management to a condominium manager, but to a management company. I think about it like, accounting is an essential part of condominium management, while technology will carry that same weight. I think what that really means on the day to day is that there's going to be standardized workflows. There's going to be process driven operations. There's going to be a lot of clear accountability built into companies and how the companies operate. I think data will become an important thing as technology evolves. One of the great things of tech is that you can pull data and you can get good insights from that. And I think really technology is going to be the catalyst. It's going to allow management companies and managers to really progress and grow as an organization or grow in your own personal sense. You have to be able to adopt and welcome technology, or you're not going to get to the next level.
Yeah, I would agree. I think having it as a critical part of your business is huge, and how you train your managers is absolutely critical. Like right now, if I wanted to answer a question about a bylaw or something in a building, you've got to go through documents, you got to spend your 20, 30 minutes reading, searching. In a world where you can just upload that document to AI and ask the question and get a solid, correct answer, it changes things, it speeds them up. And I think what you said about having less on-site time is probably 100% accurate. Not so much, mostly driven by economics. It's less expensive to have a part-time manager than a full-time manager, right? You're not paying a full salary. So there's a lot of incentive for buildings to go in that direction. And we're seeing that in Toronto as well, where building that really should have a full-time manager is only asking for, 20 hours a week. And that's only because technology exists. We don't have to go door to door dropping letters on everyone's door when we're putting a notice out anymore. We can do this by email in a matter of minutes. So the more that technology accelerates, at least the way I see it, the less time spent doing your job, the more jobs you have to do, and your portfolios grow. And the pace of the job, I think you were right when you said it before, is just going to accelerate and accelerate. I hope it doesn't, but I can't imagine working faster than I am now, but I guess I will. And hopefully AI can help me with that.
Yeah, I think too, just to add on that, like I think the other effects of AI and technology, I think AI is going to raise the baseline as well. Like I think that, as you said, like writing quality is going to become near perfect, or it can already be perfect if you use AI. So that's going to become an expectation
I think it
of
has to be,
clients.
because if anyone can write whatever they, in whatever terrible English spelling that they can do, put it into AI and get something immediately that's perfect. The expectation is going to have to be perfection in that sense, right? Like it has to be. It's too easy not to.
Yeah, and I think that there'll be other ramifications. Like I think it should be easier to be more organized. I think is a realistic outcome of AI and technology. Another thing that we sort of chatted about briefly before was, the administrative load and how that's going to change. Like, you have this great technology that's AI that can help you do a lot of the day-to-day administrative things. Is that going to, truly make managers' lives easier, or is that really going to just push up the expectation of what, the manager should be doing? So there's lots of things to think about and to kind of marinate in. But my hope and what I really want to see is hopefully a successful implementation of AI allows the manager to focus on those big things, on governance, on using proper judgment, strategic planning, things like that. And that's, what I hope that the change from AI will be.
I agree. And you just kind of remind me, like if you go back 20 years and someone's sitting at a desk and they discover that email is, this thing that they can use instead of walking around a building, dropping notes on people's doors, folding it in the doorknob or whatever they used to do, they were probably thinking, oh man, I can get so much done faster. This will be great. And then you fast forward till now and like, no, it's just the standard and you just have to be sending emails all the time to way more buildings. So like, yeah, it's going to be a double-edged sword. I agree with you that ideally, in a perfect world, AI can take the low level sort of boring rote memorization, those kinds of jobs, and have the managers focus on strategy. In reality, will we see that? I don't know. Pipes are still going to break. There's still going to be things the manager has to do that are, kind of at that lower level. But that's definitely the hope, is that, because it has some intelligence behind it. It's not just a tool to make something faster. I hope you're right, and I hope that that's the direction we're moving in, because there may be a world in the future where buildings simply have like an administrator at the site whatever hours a week, and then your actual property managers are at head office strategizing and coming up with proper policy and putting their attention where it should be put.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be interesting to tell, but I think the fundamental will be expectations of boards as well. Like I think the boards are going to have a big role in this in the future, and it will be interesting to see how they react to all the technology and all the change that's happening as well. And it's it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future.
Well, I think it'll be a big differentiator between the management companies that adopt it, like you said, and those that don't. Because what you're going to see as AI progresses and other tech tools is the companies who do embrace it are going to be operating on such a higher level, at least from what the boards see, right? Now, when it comes to strategy and decision making, that I think is outside of AI right now. That's really the human element. But just in terms of your reporting, your writing, your management reports, all of those things, the speed at which you can get things done, should be much, much better because AI can really help with that. So if you're seeing a company that's not adopting it, I think boards are going to be pretty quick to judge them and really get rid of them unless there's a good reason to keep them.
Yeah, and I think that's where, hopefully with utilizing tech more and the companies that embrace it, you have that ability to pull the data and put these kind of reports into clients' sort of faces to say, hey, your issues are being resolved, they're being resolved quickly, they're being resolved properly. Here's a report that I can do it, as opposed to it, the expectation being, oh, I didn't see you on site this week. What's going on at the property? You can
Yeah.
use technology to manage those expectations.
I'm seeing a trend here where you're definitely more of an optimist than I am, but I like it. I think you're right.
Yeah.
If boards can kind of see the value in it, and understand that the value of having someone sitting at the desk isn't necessarily as valuable as they think it is, there will be a big change, and that's just going to take time. So I think I agree with you. Sort of in the near term, that's what we might see. We may see less on-site, more centralized command center style things, and more perfection on the management level. But let's fast forward a few years because obviously we can only predict technology based on the technology that's coming out in the, now. We're at the early stages of AI, so we can kind of have a good idea of where that's going to go. At least we think we do. But there's other technologies that are kind of on the horizon, and I wouldn't say they're too far out. And so I kind of want to look down the road, more at, the robotics, the sensors, those kinds of things. And how that might impact things. And of course, here we're getting into a bit more of the theoretical and guesswork, but it's still interesting for the listeners. So I'd kind of want to know, what are your thoughts on, maybe the 10 to 20-year range?
Yeah. I think, 10 to 20 year range, the biggest impact that I would see is moving from reactive maintenance to more predictive maintenance. Like I think that is where the direction that we're going to go for condominium management, but I would say for facilities and building management as a whole. And I think what that means is that, there's technologies and tools out there that can kind of predict when things are going to go wrong as opposed to waiting for them to actually go wrong. I know there's specific examples of things like BAS monitoring, or I've heard of even stat cleaning, robots that do stat cleaning, or things like that. I think those are gonna impact condominium management, and they're gonna happen. But I think the true outcome is that you'll be able to predict things a little bit better. And I think again, you're going to get better insights on what buildings actually need, and take that emotional or opinion piece out of it. There'll be more concrete data to be able to make decisions.
Yeah, I would agree. First of all, before I even get to this, yeah, stock cleaning robot sounds amazing, and I want one. Like just as a pet, I want one of those because I would just have that thing running nonstop in every one of my properties. I agree with you. You're going to have a deluge of data, right? Like if you've got a building that's covered in sensors for water leaks, right? And that exists now, but once it becomes more economical, if it does, as you collect data, you can kind of see, where are my leaks coming from? Where are they happening? And that can guide your decision making rather than, hey, we've had, I don't know, 10 pinhole leaks over the last 2 years. We should replace the riser, which is kind of the conversations you get in boardrooms these days. You could say, okay, we've got 8 leaks in the last whatever. They came on this, and this pot. They're all branch pipes coming off the riser, and they're all at the junction point. So let's target that area because the other pipes are fine. You know what I mean? Like it's just more data driven, like you said. So I think you're right. You will see more data driven decision making. Hopefully, you'll be able to see things like automated shutoff. So if a water leak is detected, a shutoff valve turns automatically rather than waiting for a plumber to show up while it pours water out, or a superintendent tries to run up and deal with it. So that will be interesting, but I feel like there's so much more we don't know, and we just aren't going to be able to predict.
Yeah, I think it also does come back to like the earlier part of this where we were talking about the manager's time on site, right? And I think that, in 15, 20 years from now, when the buildings, operationally maybe can kind of run themselves in a way, and maybe it's that, the systems and the technology that's there knows that there's a water leak and has already dispatched a contractor before the manager even, goes to their email and sees the report. That's just going to again drive, I think, the manager's time on site and the future of condominium management, where it's like there's even more reason that you're not going to necessarily have to be on site. So I think that's going to be another ramification, is that you'll see these trends continue to change.
Yeah, and I guess the question then is, are we going to see, a slowing down of our industry? Are we going to have more self-managed boards who are relying on tech and sensors versus a professional manager that is, hired to deal with these problems, deal with leaks, deal with fires? It's possible. The industry isn't that old. It started around the 60s, 70s, and as technology develops, there's always a question of, does it have a long-term, and I mean really long-term future here? I don't think 10 to 20 years is going to make a dent, but is there a long-term future when AI, robotics, and sensors and those kinds of things can take up enough of our job that we're confined to like three really, really, really talented people sitting in a head office running 200 buildings? Is that the trend?
Yeah, it's a fun thought. Like it's amazing, and I mean it's possible. I think what it will definitely create though in the medium term. So again, in that 10, 15 year range, when these technologies are more economical and more utilized, I think it's going to shift that profile of the condominium manager. I think right now there's a laundry list. Like a condominium manager is a generalist and is so good at so many things. I think that and I think that a big piece that's going to be important is going to be the technology. Like, are you a manager that's tech enabled? Are you able to manage all these different technologies, these systems, and put them into place? And I think that things like communication will always be important for a condominium manager, but I think you're going to see the profession as a whole. There's going to be a big emphasis on your ability to use technology.
I agree. And even now, like, in terms of communication, you've got managers that say I'm a great communicator and others that say I'm not as strong, but ultimately you can put in bullet points into, ChatGPT or Claude or something and just say, I want this memo written up, and it'll do it perfectly. And like we said before, it's hard to say I'm not a good communicator. You just have to put a schedule together and have AI do it for you, and have some things to talk about. But again, just getting back to it in the short term, there's no excuse not to be doing those kinds of things. Longer term, I agree with you. I think we're going to see just a very strong shift in what the manager does. And again, that'll be board driven. So some boards aren't going to change anything. They still want their manager sitting in the office doing things the way they've always done it. But over time, that's going to change as new board members come on and, have grown up in a world of technology.
Yeah, and I think on the whole, again, what you'll see is less of that, the condominium manager that's, answering the phone every time it rings, and that's somebody that, residents come into the front door and they know everybody by first name. I think it's the profession will shift to more of like, you're an operational strategist, sorry. Like you have strategy that you're bringing to the building, that you're looking at trends, looking at data. But yeah, interesting time for sure.
It is, and it's changing faster and faster as we go, right? Like, 2021, there was no such thing as AI that we as managers could use. And all of a sudden, this is becoming indispensable. It's something that we really shouldn't be doing our job without. Privacy concerns aside, you got to be careful, but if used properly, you need to be using it, because if you're not using it, someone else is going to use it and do better than you, and you're not going to last in the industry for long. So it's really curious. And like I said, when it comes to robotics and sensors, it's anyone's guess how that's going to shape up, but it's interesting to think about it. I wanted to take another step into the future and really let's go another 50 years or so, and really talk about what the viability of the industry as a whole here, of condos, not just condo management, because in Toronto anyways, and I think in Ottawa to some extent, we're seeing a lot of buildings that are massive. They're just absolutely massive. 800,000, over 1,000 units in a glass skyscraper. And these things aren't necessarily the best built, buildings. It's curtain wall, so it's glass all around. any of you that have done a window replacement project know how expensive this is, right? I'm sure you've probably done a number of them in your career. What does it look like economically when a building that's, 70 stories made all of glass has to do a window replacement because they're mid-tier, mid-quality windows aren't, holding up anymore.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a challenge, and I think we're going to get ourselves into territory that we've probably never been in as an industry, where some of these condos that were built 50, 60 years ago, they not only have to do that window project, but maybe they have to do four other projects in the short term, and the cost to do that is so high that other avenues need to be explored. Like maybe it's not even realistic to do a loan or a special assessment, and there has to be other alternatives considered. And I think that's a position we've never been in as an industry, and it's an unfortunate one, but I think that's unfortunately going to be a reality. But the challenge is that things are expensive, right? And construction costs are continuing to increase, especially for certain buildings that are of this risk profile where they're glass curtain walls, and they're having envelope failures and water penetrations. Like it's a lot of money, and it's not. I don't think it's going to be great for a lot of condos.
Yeah, I mean, and even like you gotta remember the condo industry in general is not that old. Like we're talking 60s, 50s that it started. So a lot of the buildings, the multi-story buildings that were put up, um, the earliest ones are getting to that point where they're really showing their age. But on the flip side, those early buildings were built well. They're brick and stone and, heavy materials. They're not what we're seeing today where, economically a developer's putting something up that's massive and tiny, tiny units and thin walls and all that stuff. And I'm curious just in the long term, like we've been building them the last 15, 20 years we've been building these things, but do they have a future? Like economically, physically you can keep a building going forever if you just keep patching and band-aiding and repairing. But economically it doesn't necessarily work. At some point, the maintenance fees and the pressure on the owners is just going to get such that it doesn't make sense to live in this arrangement anymore. I'm wondering what your thoughts are just on that.
Yeah, I think it's such a broad. It brings in the whole market, like market conditions, right? Because until people that are in the marketplace buying these types of condos, maybe see and realize the horror stories of what these condos, like if they're not being built properly, what it can cost to fix major elements down the line. I don't know if we're going to see a lot of changes because the market's driving what condos are being built. So it's interesting. I think it's going to take time, but I think when time does progress, it'll be kind of one of those buyer bewares. But until we get to the point where we are seeing these live in action and people are talking about it, I think we're going to be in a charter, like a period of unknown, for sure.
Yeah, like I've got an example building, one of mine. It's got it was a townhouse. It wasn't a big building, not a ton of units, but had a roof problem. And it was discovered years later, prior to me taking over. Unfortunately, I hopefully would have caught this, but scuppers on the roof were leaking, and it was the cheap material they were using for the roof decking and for the I-joists, and it had just rotted away. So now the owners there are looking at 200 plus $1,000 special assessment per person to fix this thing. And you can't sell, you can't, all you got to do is pay this. And so like that's a substantial portion of the cost of a unit, right? We're not talking $4,000 or $8,000 special assessment, which is hard enough on people. We're talking a sizable percent of the actual unit. And, that's now. And when you fast forward, you take these buildings, the stack towns or the high rises, and you fast forward way into the future, like these things aren't necessarily designed with an indefinite lifespan, right? And with a small townhouse complex, you can tear it down and put something else up. But with a 70 floor tower, you can't do that. It's economically very difficult to purchase and tear down a glass giant, right? One of these Goliaths. So it seems like we've kind of gotten into this thing where we haven't really planned for the future, which is so like us as a world, um, to get into this. But it's just interesting. I find it interesting to look at that side of it and then also look at the tech side and the near term, like we were talking about before, because one is much more optimistic, and then we've got this kind of cliff in the future where we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to see is there's going to have to continuously be more dialogue and communication with the developers and the people that are actually building these condos. And I know in Ottawa, it's not. I don't know about in the Toronto GTA area, but in Ottawa, there's not I would say that proper feedback loop where things are being relayed from one side to the other. So I think as an industry continuing to push that so that the people building these buildings actually know, okay, what are the challenges, what are the real sort of horror stories that we're seeing. I think you'll also add in to a level of sort of governance, like you sort of touched on, a smaller building or even a row of townhouses like that could be maybe destroyed and repurposed or sold or redeveloped or whatever. But it also requires a lot of owner support to be able to do that. And there's, I would presume declaration changes, bylaw changes,
It's
things like
very,
that.
very difficult to terminate a condo. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, how is the province going to support the corporations in that phase, right? Is the Condo Act going to have to change? How are these things going to be considered? And I think these are all, again, questions we don't have answers to, but really real considerations for down the line.
Yeah, my chance to bitch at the government is coming up here. So yes, the Condo Act is going to need to change, and I think it really should have changed already, just to keep up with current times. You got to remember the last version that was actually passed was prior to the internet being a real thing, and now we're moving into AI and more. All sorts of things about privacy and stuff like that needs to be updated. But yeah, when we get to the distant future, and we're talking, when I say distant, I mean still probably within our lifetimes or our kids' lifetimes. The Condo Act is going to have to change because yes, you're going to have to factor in not just the new technology, the new forms of management, but the end of a condo. What does that look like? How are you going to get a building sold and torn down when half the people don't want to and are willing to pay fees that are exorbitant because that's what's required to keep it going? Very hard to sell your unit. So all sorts of new problems come up, just naturally on their own as things age.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So we're actually getting pretty close to our half hour here. Just out of curiosity, anything else that we haven't touched on that you'd want to kind of talk about or put out there?
No, I think, a thought that I have that I think it's important to share with the industry is that, as we talk about technology, as we talk about the future, I think it's important to remember that the future of condominium manager is not about replacing people with technology. I think it's about using technology to eliminate some of the frictions that we see. And I think, my goal is to really allow that technology to enable the manager to focus on the right things. That's judgment, that's governance, protecting the assets that we're managing. And I think that if we maybe get together in 10, 15 years from now and we reflect on all the things that have happened, it'll be interesting to see what direction we go. But nonetheless, technology is here; it's here to stay, and I think you kind of have to innovate or die, as they say.
I think it's very, very well said. And you're right, we do have a decision on how we use this and how we implement it. And I think a best case scenario is exactly what you said, is we work as an industry, train our boards as best we can to allow us to use this technology to take away the pointless, the boring, the grunt work essentially that is part of our job and focus on the things that really add value. And that's really what we're being paid for, is to guide the ship, not to, clean it or make sure the deck's clear. I don't know, the analogy is going away, but you get the idea. We're wasting our time doing the administrative bureaucratic work. And I think you're right. If we play our cards right, we absolutely could see, a near future where we can sort of step back, use our brains, focus on the right things full time, and let technology take care of the rest. I hope that's what we do see. So Noah, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right. Noah from Sentinel Property Management. Again, big thank you. Take care.